On today's episode, we break down the top 5 prospect performances of the past week, highlighted by a trio of Chicago Blackhawks, including Frank Nazar, who absolutely decimated Max Domi's ankles.
You are Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, and welcome back to Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On this show, we break down everything prospects related for you 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. I'm your host, Sebastian Hyde, the USHL scout over at Elite Prospects, and on today's show, we're going to be breaking down 5 of the top performers of the past week in the prospect world. This is based on an article series that we have running over at Elite Prospects, which will, of course, be linked in the description down below. Me and Hattie Kalikesh, the former co-host here on the pod, take turns each week breaking down 5 of the top performances. And this week, Hattie took care of the article, and 3 Chicago Blackhawks players are highlighting the bunch here. In the first segment, we're going to be breaking down Frank Nazar's game as he is finally really catching flame at the NHL level. Then in the second one, we're going to double down on the Blackhawks, focusing on Nick Lardis, who is scoring for absolute fun in the OHL, as well as Artyom Levshunov, who is finally finding his feet at the AHL level with the Rockford IceHogs, who scored 4 points this past week. And finally, in the last segment, we're going to talk about a pair of really interesting European prospects playing in the CHL. First and foremost of the Washington Capitals, Ilya Protas, who just transferred to the OHL this past offseason from the USHL, and he's a 6'5" forward who's combined wonderfully with Liam Greentree of the Los Angeles Kings there in Windsor. And finally, the last player on the list is of the New Jersey Devils, and it's Matyas Melovsky, who's been scoring a lot of points, including a hat trick and 7-point performance in a 14-0 victory over the St. John Sea Dogs for Matyas Melovsky and his Bécomo Drakkar. All of that here on today's show. So before we jump into everything, please do settle in, grab a drink, and make yourselves comfortable. So for this first segment, let's kick it straight off with Frank Nazar. So Chicago Blackhawks fans who are listening, this is a player that I have been very excited about for a really long time. He was my second overall player on my personal rankings in that 2022 draft class. I had Shane Wright at 1, and then Nazar at 2, Logan Cooley at 3, and I believe Slafkovsky was in there at 4 or 5. But I've always been in love with how Frank Nazar plays the game of hockey. He is all pace, all intensity, so much speed and explosiveness in his feet, and he pairs that with a really quick hockey mind and a bunch of clinical ability in and around the net front. He really showed off that ability this past week against the Toronto Maple Leafs, where he tore into Max Domi's ankles on his assist on Philip Kurashev's goal, where he toe dragged around Max Domi, who just fell and went flying, and then put a perfect cross-seam pass across to Kurashev, who gained just enough separation from the Toronto defender to put the puck in the back of the net. It's been a great week for Frank Nazar. Production-wise, 2 assists, no goals. Doesn't pop off the page. He hasn't exploded offensively yet at the NHL level, but he's playing bigger minutes. He's playing inside that top 6. He played 18 minutes in the most recent loss against the Utah Hockey Club, and hasn't played less than 14 minutes in any of the last 10 games. He's really become a consistent piece in Chicago's lineup. He's up to 4 goals and 12 points in 29 NHL games this season. Again, doesn't jump off the page as of yet, but remember, this is a player that really only had 1 full healthy season of college hockey under his belt, and then signing his entry-level contract at the end of last season before making a quick little appearance in 3 games with the Blackhawks. But I think that he's already shown both in the AHL, where he's exploded. I mean, 24 points in 21 games as a professional rookie is nothing to scoff at whatsoever, especially on a team like the Rockford IceHogs. And And again, for a player who missed almost his entire draft plus one season, he only got into 13 games that year, scored 2 goals and 7 points in that span with the University of Michigan. But that past season with the point a game scoring in the NCAA was great progression, and then this year one-upping that still by being over a point a game in the AHL and progressing his game at both ends of the ice. The defensive intensity has always kind of been there with Nazar. He always leaves everything out on the ice. He's not one to not put in the effort on a given play, but the defensive decision-making and the habits and the scanning and situational awareness have really progressed since his draft year, which I've been impressed by. I didn't get to watch him very much in either of his 2 NCAA campaigns, but I've caught a couple of his NHL and AHL games this year, and I loved what I've seen in terms of the progression with this player. And while in a redraft, he would no longer be at number 2 on my board, he is certainly a player that I really appreciate and think that he's going to bring a bunch of value in the top 6 for Chicago for a really, really long time. He's a guy that will complement Connor Bedard really well, as I think like the second line version of bringing that kind of speed and goal scoring ability that Bedard does as well. That dynamic pace off the rush is something that Nazar can really lead with, and whether he's doing that at center or on the wing, we're gonna have to wait and see. I think that pairing Nazar and a guy like Oliver Moore together in terms of speed and defensive work rate will be a really good second line kind of structure to build off of. But we're going to see how things shake out in Chicago in the longer term with how these prospects fit into the lineup. But the guy that we're going to talk about in the next segment is definitely going to have his say of making a push to become a sniper in a top 6 capacity with Nick Lardis, who has been just scoring loads of goals, 63 goals in 56 games this season. He's going to try to break an OHL record from this millennium, I believe. And but Nazar, in terms of that combination of speed, playmaking, and goal scoring, is a real unique piece in the forward core among Chicago's prospects. And the dynamism he brings, I think, is a real core piece of what the Blackhawks are trying to build moving forward. So I've been very happy to see him playing not just NHL minutes, but substantial ones and top 6 opportunities within that. And while the scoring hasn't absolutely exploded, he does have 4 points in his last 5 games. It's starting to roll. The minutes are coming in. He's gaining some chemistry with players like Philip Kurashev, and the pace at which he's been playing at the NHL level, I think, should really impress Chicago Blackhawks fans. So if you're a Blackhawks fan, please do let me know in the comments, what are your thoughts on Nazar at this point in his development? What are your expectations for him down the road, and how has he perhaps been relative to the expectations you had on draft day for this player, or even relative to Kirby Dach as an asset, who was, of course, instrumental in bringing Frank Nazar to the Chicago Blackhawks? So please do let me know down below. But Nazar is a player I love to watch, and I think that he's really explored and expanded his game since his draft year, but has always stayed true to the things that have really made him as a hockey player, in terms of that ceaseless intensity, game-breaking speed, and the ability to really pounce off the rush and create dangerous goal-scoring chances, whether it be for himself or for a fellow rusher going up the ice. He's a player that is going to combine for some really pretty rush goals with the Chicago Blackhawks down the line, especially once guys like Oliver Moore, who can also bring that speed like Connor Bedard, will be in the lineup. But that wraps up this first segment. In the next one, we're going to keep exploring the Blackhawks with Nick Lardis and Artyom Levshunov, who have been both impressing in their own right so far this season. But first, a quick message from our sponsors. You just realized that your business needed to hire somebody yesterday. How can you find amazing candidates fast? Easy. Just use Indeed. When it comes to hiring, Indeed is all you need. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other sites. Indeed sponsored jobs put your post at the top of the page and help you reach the right candidates faster. I've been in that spot where I've just needed the right hire like yesterday. The pressure's on, and every day without the right person is a real setback. That's exactly why Indeed sponsored jobs come right in handy. They make sure that your post is seen by the right candidates right now. Now you can speed up your hiring process with a $75 sponsored job credit. Just go to indeed.com/lockedon right now and support our show by saying that you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring, Indeed, is all you need. All right, let's keep this episode rolling in the second segment, starting off with Nick Lardis of the Brantford Bulldogs and Chicago Blackhawks, who has been absolutely scoring for fun in the OHL and has been a revelation ever since the Hamilton Bulldogs acquired him from the Peterborough Petes back in his draft year. As a reminder, in his draft year to start off in 36 games with the Petes, he had 12 goals and 19 points in a middle six, third line kind of capacity. And then after the trade to the Hamilton Bulldogs, had 25 goals and 46 points in 33 games. And he has not stopped ever since. He was limited to only 37 games last season, but still scored 29 goals and 50 points across that span. And this year, he has stayed healthy, having also had a one-game stint in the Rockford Ice Hogs last year, getting a little bit of a taste of pro hockey. He's gone back to the OHL with a vengeance. 63 goals and 103 points in 56 games in the OHL. That is better than what you could possibly hope for a player who, again, was drafted in the third round, 67th overall in 2023 by the Chicago Blackhawks. And Lardis is only the second player in the entire OHL to pass the 100-point mark. He's the only player in the OHL who's over a goal a game. Michael Misa has 10 more points in 2 fewer games, but and also has a precisely 1 goal a game pace. But of course, Nick Lardis has exceeded that. So you're looking at the OHL's top goal scorer here, who is going to look to break the record of OHL goal scoring from this millennium, this campaign, which fingers crossed he does. I think that'll be very fun to see. But Lardis has just absolutely found his niche as a finisher, but also expanded his game beyond just that. In his draft year, he very much was a pure finishing player, but he's brought a lot more intensity into his shifts. His playmaking has become a much bigger strength than it was in his draft year. And he's also been able to become a lot more deceptive in his goal scoring and overall his puck touches by also being that playmaking threat, showing playmaking, and then using the shot and vice versa. The playmaking has really also made the goal scoring far more deceptive and dangerous against a higher level competition is going to be key to translating this kind of production to a lower scale, certainly to the professional level, because I don't think he's going to take too long to adjust to the AHL. The big jump is going to be to the National Hockey League. Players like Nick Lardis dominate the AHL every single season, but he has that special something and that intelligence, the quick wit offensively, the ability to find soft ice and also just bounce off of contact and push off of opponents into those pockets. There's a lot of proactive habits in Nick Lardis' game that make the goal scoring tick. And those are the elements that I think Chicago Blackhawks fans should be excited about. He's never going to be the biggest checking winger in the world, but if you're able to insulate him with guys that can really work hard, he's going to try to match their intensity to the best of his ability. But he's a real leadership kind of player. And just to show you just how dominant he's been over this past recent stretch and why he's among the top performing prospects of the past week. In his last 10 games, this player has 19 goals and 27 points. That is like 2 goal a game over a 10-game span is pretty ridiculous. One of the only players in the entire CHL who scored less in his last 10 in terms of points, or scored more, in terms of points in his last 10 is Berkeley Catton, who has 31 points in his last 10 games. But there's a lot of these players really popping off in the CHL right now, but Lardis has really been among the most impressive offensive producers and consistent producers at that this season. But let's move on now to the third player in today's episode, Artyom Levshunov, sticking with the Chicago Blackhawks theme. Here we have another player who's been really excelling offensively over the past weeks. In his last 10 games, Levshunov has 2 goals and 9 points in 10 games as a 6'2", 209-pound right shot defenseman. He was, of course, the Chicago Blackhawks' second overall selection this past draft in Las Vegas. And while he definitely took some time to acclimate to the AHL level, I don't think that if I had been in charge of his development that I would have been in favor of a jump to the AHL this early. I would have really liked to have given him one more season at Michigan State University to refine his defensive game primarily. The offense, was already really impressive last year with his 35 points in 38 games, but the refinement in the decision-making of the offensive activation still needed some work, and I think there's a lot that he could have still explored in his game with another college year. And Michigan State University is such a wonderful program at the moment for developing players like Levshunov, that I think it would have not hurt his development whatsoever to send him back to that environment. But that's not the decision that the Blackhawks organization made. Instead, they signed him and decided to develop him with Rockford in the AHL instead. This season, he's played 47 games, so he stayed healthy, which is, of course, the most important thing out of the gate. And then 5 goals and 21 points. But again, 9 of those have come in the last 10. So the recent goal scoring or the recent point scoring streak has definitely made his numbers look a lot better for a D+1 campaign in the AHL than they looked previously this season. But beyond just the numbers, there definitely still a lot of growing pains on the defensive side of the game for Levshunov. The decision-making still a work in progress, but something I keep repeating, and for Blackhawks listeners of the podcast that tune in whenever I talk Blackhawks, you may be annoyed at hearing me say this once again, but he's had no consistency in terms of environment for the last 4 years. He switched teams every single offseason, from Team Belarus U18 to Green Bay Gamblers in the USHL to Michigan State University in college hockey, and now to the Rockford Ice Hogs in the AHL. That's 4 consecutive seasons of being taken out and put into a completely new environment with absolutely no continuation, if not even a single player or teammate following him from place to place on any of those moves. It's been a consistent need to readjust to his environment, and all of this while learning English and pursuing his studies last year at Michigan State. So a lot has been going on in Levshunov's life, and he still is a bit of a raw player. And considering that he spent most of his development years in Belarus, it's understandable that he still has some areas of his game to refine and work on and find consistency at the high pace of North American professional hockey. So I hope that Blackhawks fans are able to give him some patience, because he's always going to be a bit more of a long-term project than other players available at second overall. But still, he has the physicality, the mobility, the flashes of defensive shutdown aggression, and also the offensive activations, the wicked shot, the deception on puck. These are all elements that are strengths in his game. I think that there's still a lot to grow in terms of consistency and decision making, but these elements will improve with time. And I would give him at least another full season in Rockford before giving him NHL minutes, because he needs some kind of consistency year to year. I really would not want to take him out and put him into the most competitive environment in the world yet again without a single year-to-year consistent team. And still, we were seeing now what a Levshunov gaining form can look like in terms of producing more offense. He's still showing some of that immaturity. His last game, he had 15 penalty minutes. He's still making some poor decisions at times, both in terms of being over aggressive, over physical, losing his composure, losing his temper at times. But he's a 19-year-old player playing at the AHL level, and a player that, again, still has a lot of areas to refine on the mental side of the game. So he's been doing a really good job, all things considered, this year. Of course, the pressure is always on when you're a second overall selection, but still, I think that Artyom Levshunov is going to be a really interesting number 2 or number 3 defenseman for the Chicago Blackhawks long term. I really hope they're able to get their hands on a player like Matthew Schaefer at the draft this year, because that would make everything in their lineup just click into place. Levshunov as a number 2 next to Schaefer works wonderfully. The forward core, I think, would be really supported by that kind of a first pair that can activate comfortably offensively and make things happen in terms of goal scoring threat, as well as shutting things down at their own end. But still, I think the Chicago Blackhawks are in a pretty good spot in terms of the development of their young talents, and the fact that 3 of their prospects are highlighted among this week's top performers is certainly something to enjoy if you're a Hawks fan. But that wraps up this second segment. In the last one, we're going to be breaking down the games of Ilya Protas and Matyas Melovsky. But first, a quick message from our sponsors. All righty, let's wrap up the show here in the final segment, starting off with Ilya Protas of the Windsor Spitfires, who was drafted by the Washington Capitals in the 3rd round at 75th overall this past draft in 2024, after scoring 51 points in 61 games with the Des Moines Buccaneers in the USHL last year, his first year after coming over from Team Belarus. So a second Belarusian in today's episode, which may be a first in terms of the Ringside Roundup series. And this season, he's absolutely exploded in terms of the offensive scoring. 41 goals and 98 points in 52 games. He has been dynamite alongside of Liam Greentree, who was a first-round selection of the LA Kings last draft. And it meant that Greentree got a partner in crime to work with, and Protas has been really, really impressive this season in terms of the in-tight playmaking and working off of the space that Liam Greentree's handling and high-end intelligence create in the offensive zone. And while he isn't the traditional power forward in the sense of lowering the shoulder, driving the net, carrying defenders with him, that's not in his game yet. There's a lot of soft skill and deft puck touches and little one-touch playmaking sequences that are really impressive. And he has 5 goals and 15 points in his last 5 games, 9 goals and 23 points in his last 10. It's been a real hot streak for Protas, and the Washington Capitals should be very happy with this draft pick. I mean, to have 2 Protas brothers popping off and exploding offensively at the same time, one already on your NHL team and the other one waiting in the wings in the OHL this year, that's exciting stuff. We're seeing a lot of NHL teams trying to get those brother combos at the draft, and in terms of those, you also have Florian Xhekaj and Arbor Xhekaj with the Montreal Canadiens. But the Protas brothers are certainly producing a lot more offense at this stage than the Xhekaj brothers are. While Protas's numbers might suggest a player that has to make a jump to pro hockey right away, I wouldn't actually be against sending him back to the OHL for one more season after this one. Sure, you can bring him to the AHL. I think that wouldn't hurt him whatsoever. I mean, he's 6'5", 201 pounds. Physically, he's certainly ready to make that jump to professional opposition. But I also think that there would be some benefit in giving him another season alongside a player like Liam Greentree to just explore his offensive game as much as you can get him to. That way, when you do bring him to the professional ranks, you already have him completely acclimated to playing top 6 minutes alongside highly skilled players who think the game at a really fast pace. That said, I don't think that Washington can do too much wrong with his development here, but I'm curious to see what their decision is going to be, because he already has 98 points in 52 OHL games this season, which really isn't far behind where Nick Lardis is at, which is pretty impressive. I mean, Protas is 4th in scoring, just 1 point behind 3rd, who is his line mate, Liam Greentree. So those two have certainly been doing a lot of work for the Windsor Spitfires. But a lot of players have been scoring a lot of points in the OHL this season, which has been very fun to keep an eye on. But last but not least, for this episode, we're going to move over to the QMJHL and the B Kumu Dakar, as Matyas Melovsky, the Czech forward and 6th round selection of the New Jersey Devils this past year, has been exploding offensively. He went undrafted in his actual draft year in 2022-23 after scoring just 6 goals, but 58 points in 59 games as a pure playmaker in Baie-Comeau. And then last year, he one-upped himself with 18 goals and 60 points across 53 games, which was enough for the Devils to take a swing on the D+1 player. And this year, he's really come into his own. 23 goals, 47 assists, 70 points in 48 games. That's a wonderful stat line for the Czech national. And as a 6'1", 190-pound forward, he has a decent frame to work with, but it really is that combination of physical habits to create little pockets of space, but mainly little pockets in order to create and to be a playmaker. He looks to use his handling to complement his playmaking. Everything feeds into his playmaking. He's constantly looking to put his teammates in. He's a very supportive kind of player. Off puck positioning is very active in sticking in passing lanes, implements delays to not overshoot his routes, and to just stay in a supportive position for a teammate on puck. And he's been a real revelation this season in the QMJHL. His 70 points in 40 games are pretty good across the league in terms of scoring. It's good for tied at 8th in across the entire league, tied with, among others, Bill Zonin, who is a very interesting player in this 2025 draft class, but behind the likes of Caleb Desnoyers and Justin Carbonneau, who are definitely two names to keep an eye on, and that I'm sure you're already familiar with if you are a regular listener of the podcast here. But to go back to Melovsky, this isn't a player that I think has massive like top 6 upside for the New Jersey Devils. I mean, maybe there's a 5% chance he can be another Jesper Bratt, but there isn't the same level of pace and just high-end inside drive that makes Bratt so special. But the playmaking is a real positive asset. And in terms of projecting as an NHL piece, I think that as a bottom 6 playmaker, maybe second power play connector, there is definitely some upside with this player, but it's still only his first year after being drafted. He's still just 20 years old. He's going to need some time to refine, give him at least a year or two in the AHL, but there might be an NHL player here at the end of the day for the New Jersey Devils. He's certainly an interesting prospect who's taken some really big strides in his development. In terms of recent games, my former co-host Hadi Kalakesh had this to say about Matyas Melovsky in a game against the Val d'Or in January of this year, saying that this was a fantastic game from Melovsky, who was everywhere in this one. His transition footwork and ability to modulate his pace kept him dynamic and elusive, and his passing skill was on full display. Connected multiple times through tough seams, looked off his passes and threw defensemen off his scent by pointing his feet away from his target. He also scored off a powerful half-wall wrister on the power play to give Baie-Comeau the lead early in the game, and he seems absolutely tailor-made for Justin Poirier, who is a dynamic, undersized, high motor and really vicious kind of goal scorer who loves to throw his body in tight, as Melovsky is a big, dynamic playmaking center who can contribute defensively. So those two have been certainly elevating each other, and two Baie-Comeau draft picks from the 2024 draft who have been combining wonderfully so far this campaign. But that wraps up the episode here for us today. As always, Hattie's article is going to be linked in the description down below. If you're watching here on YouTube, please do let me know what you thought about today's episode. What are your takeaways from these prospects, and which players do you think that I missed in terms of talking about of standout performers this week? And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, please do make sure to make us your first listen of the day. We always appreciate our everydayers here on the podcast. And for your second listen of the day, you can head on over to Locked On Fantasy Hockey, where Flip and Steele break down everything you need to know to build a sustainable and competitive fantasy roster. But that wraps things up here for us today. Thank you so much for listening. I'm your host, Sebastian High, and I hope to catch you listening again very, very soon.